In 1988, the most successful black-owned company in American history, sold for $61 million. The buyer was a corporation. The seller was Berry Gordy. What transferred was not music. It was the infrastructure. This is what was built. This is who came for it. And this is what it cost. 1959, Detroit. A converted house on West Grand Boulevard. $800. No bank in Detroit in 1959 was going to lend $800 to a 29-year-old black man with a dream about music. That money came from the B.R. Berry Co-op, a family savings pool built, generation by generation, for exactly this kind of moment. The music industry had a theory at the time. Black music had a ceiling. It lived in its own chart category, its own radio stations, its own sales lane. What the record reveals is that Berry Gordy was not trying to raise the ceiling. He was going to remove it. And he was not going to do it by making records. He was going to build a system. On January 12, 1959, Motown Record Corporation was incorporated. What he built was not a record label. The structural reading of this moment is essential. Vertical integration means you own every node of the production chain. You do not just make the product, you own the place where it is created, the rights to everything inside it, and the mechanism that moves it to the public. Here is what that looked like in practice. Hitsville, USA Recording Studio. Owned. Joe Beat Music Company Publishing Arm. Owned. Holland Dozier Holland, Smokey Robinson, Norman Whitfield Songwriting Factory. In-house. The Motown Artist Development Program Grooming, Choreography, Stage Presence. In-house. Every node of the music value chain. Owned. Beneath every Motown record, there was a band. James Jamerson on bass. Benny Benjamin on drums. Earl Van Dyke on keys. Robert White and Joe Messina on guitar. These musicians played on more #1 pop hits than the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and Elvis Presley combined. That is not a metaphor. That is a documented count. Between 1959 and 1972, they were the sound of American popular music. And they were not credited on a single Motown album. Not one. Until 1971, 12 years in their names did not appear on any record they played on. They were paid flat session fees under work-for-hire contracts. The royalties flowed to Motown. The masters belonged to Gordy. The mechanism that controlled their labor was the same mechanism Berry Gordy was fighting when he built the label. That is the first contradiction embedded in the system. By 1967, 75% of Motown's releases were charting on the pop charts. The crossover was engineered. It did not happen to Motown. Gordy made it happen. By 1968, annual revenues reached $30 million. In today's terms, $250 million. The most commercially successful black-owned media company in American history. Before we name what came next, we have to name the system Gordy was working against. Race Records was a formal Billboard magazine chart category until 1949. It existed to ensure that black music was commercially separated from white music. Different chart, different radio, different market. The category was renamed Rhythm and Blues. In 1949, the name changed. The function did not. This is not coincidence. It is mechanism. In 1968, the songwriting team that had written more Motown hit records than any other creative force filed a lawsuit. Holland Dozier Holland alleged that Berry Gordy had not paid them their contracted royalties, that the accounting for their songwriting earnings had been managed in a way that systematically undervalued their contributions. They left the label. The team that wrote Heat Wave, Stop in the Name of Love, Reach Out I'll Be There, and You Can't Hurry Love, walked out of Hitsville, USA and never returned. What they alleged was not unusual in the music industry. It was the precise mechanism Berry Gordy had used to distinguish Motown from those labels. The argument he had built the company on was now being used against him. The extraction logic does not have a loyalty to the side it is on. In 1971, Marvin Gaye presented Berry Gordy with a completed album. It was called What's Going On? Political Music. Personal Music. Unlike anything Motown had released, Berry Gordy refused to release it. He called it uncommercial. He believed it would damage the label's mainstream positioning. Marvin Gaye told Gordy that if it was not released, he would never record another album for Motown. Gordy released it in March 1971. What's Going On became Motown's best-selling single to that point in the label's history. What that moment reveals is not a conflict between two men. It is the internal pressure point of the system itself. The commercial infrastructure that Berry Gordy had built to protect black creative work had become the mechanism constraining it. On August 2, 1983, James Jamerson died. He was 47 years old. His name had not appeared on a single Motown album. In the first 12 years he played on them. His bass lines, the rhythmic architecture on which the Motown sound was built, had generated hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. Not $1 of that revenue flowed to him as a royalty. He was a session musician. He had signed a work-for-hire contract. The music was not his. In 1988, Berry Gordy sold Motown Records to MCA for $61 million. MCA acquired the Motown brand, the artist contracts, the master recordings, and Joe Beat Music, the publishing arm that owned the rights to every song ever recorded under the Motown system. One of the most valuable music publishing catalogs ever assembled. Gordy had built Joe Beat specifically to retain ownership of what his artists created. He succeeded. And then he sold it. In 1993, MCA sold Motown to Polygram. The price was $325 million. In 5 years, the original $61 million had become a 5 times return. In 1998, Polygram was absorbed by Universal Music Group, the music division of Vivendi, a French media conglomerate headquartered in Paris. The songs recorded in a converted house in Detroit in the early 1960s, the songs that dismantled the commercial segregation of American popular music, the songs built on the uncredited labor of the Funk Brothers, the songs that Marvin Gaye fought to make political. When the system told him it could not afford to be those songs, now generate royalty income for a corporation based in Paris. What this episode adds to the channel's argument is a theorem, not a biography. The system Berry Gordy built was so well constructed, so evidently valuable, so demonstrably profitable, that it could not stay in the hands of the person who built it. That is not a statement about Berry Gordy's failure. That is a statement about how the market responds to exceptional black-owned infrastructure. Place this episode beside the one on Michael Jackson and the ATV catalog, and the through-line emerges with precision. The architecture of extraction does not change. Only the asset changes. Berry Gordy borrowed $800 in January 1959. He understood that the only viable protection against extraction was ownership of the full value chain. He built that ownership. He held it for 29 years. The $800 was never the point. The architecture was. One of the youngest artists Berry Gordy ever signed, a 10-year-old from Gary, Indiana, who first performed at Hitsville, USA in 1969, was watching all of this. 15 years later, that artist bid on the publishing rights to the Beatles catalog. He outbid Paul McCartney. And he won. That story is already in this library. The link is below.